Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 99th livestream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode of Deeper Discussions, we have a unique topic. It's going to be a little bit of a casual day, but Kage and I are going to be here to talk about classes. What are classes? What does it mean? What should it mean to you as a player and to your character? And just kind of wanted to dive into this because there does seem to be this feel in the generalized D&D community that classes are just another thing to select, another aspect to build your character off of. But I think there's a lot more to it that a lot of people overlook. And that's what we're here to discuss today in our Deeper Discussions. Before we get started, the only update I have is for those that are in the Discord. We have our polls up finally. So we have all of the name changes that we are thinking about posted in the Discord in the polls channel, as well as one additional topic regarding background music for the stream. So we want to know what you guys think. If you guys are watching on YouTube, or if you guys see this a little bit later, we have this the polls are going to be going for 2 weeks to get your guys' ideas. So if you want to hop in, I will have the link in chat for our Discord, but join it. Let us know what you think about the new name changes and which one you would vote for. And yeah, definitely let us know what you guys think about the background music. But other than that, we are going to just get started. What is up, my dude? How you doing?
Shalom, shalom, my friends. I'm excited to be here. Another nice, successful week out, and we're back again.
Back at it
for
again.
Some deeper discussions. But no, it's a good time. I'm excited. I'm very. I like the exploration that we're doing on today's topic when it comes to classes, because it helps me a lot, even when I'm thinking about NPCs and just how I embody what someone or something is, right? I think this getting into the weeds of what is a class, what are you as your character, as your being, I think it'll be very very cool.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I think it'll be a unique one, because I do like having our history of episodes, which are really fun, and I like having things that are a little bit more tangible and concrete. But this is one that I've had on the books for a while, just kind of in the background. I wanted to kind of just toy with it in my own head a little bit in terms of which directions I wanted to go. But yeah, this is one of those areas that I feel is... I've never seen or heard of anybody, whether it's in any forums or any gaming groups. This is just not a topic that I've heard a lot of people or anybody speak on before, And I feel like it's one of those things that is... it's almost unknown. I think it's an aspect that I just don't think... I think it's so ingrained with how the culture is with D&D nowadays that this is just an aspect that people just don't put that much thought into. And that's kind of thing. Yeah. I think what our goal here is today is to start planting that seed and get that conversation out there, because I think there's a lot more to be done with this. And what are we talking about? Let's kind of start there. So what are we talking about? So today's topic is based around what is a class, or what are classes in D&D. And what we really wanted to talk about is basically the fact that this is much more than just a choice, right? When you're building a character and you're planning out, a build, if you're a straight analytical, min-maxer just looking for the best combination, this may absolutely not apply to you. But for anybody looking to have a more enriching character, a more enriching backstory, and a way to make your character feel more alive. Kage and I have talked so long now on this stream about getting into our characters, and we talked about some ways that we've done this, but this is one of those other layers that I think we instinctually do. But again, no one's ever really spoken about, and I've not really seen it used by anybody else. And that's really conceptualizing what a class is and what that choice means. And one way that I've always liked to put it is that choosing a class is more about what you are. Like I always like to look at it as, I think most people look at it as what you can do. Like they choose a class, they choose that option, they get the feats, they get all of the aspects of that class for the build that they want, for the things that they can do. But I don't think enough people really put into a mind about what that means you are. And that's what we're here to talk
Yeah.
about. Big Dungeon, what is going on? You're here to lurk while you're putting the kiddos to bed. That is fine. I am so happy you're here. Good to see you. Thank you for showing up. But yes, so that's really what I wanted to talk about, is that it's so much more about what you are than what you can do, right? Like it obviously, when you're doing your character creation, I think that's where just in general the community has gotten to this mindset, right? It's because the only time you really talk about your class is in what you can do. Like,
Yeah.
I have a character, well, what class are you? And that just defines things that you can do and how you're going to level up. But the book doesn't really give you any guidance. No book, not even second edition, has really given you guidance on what does this mean for your character, their backstory, and their approach
I feel
to everything else.
a lot of the times the reason why that happens is because people get that feeling, like the Baldur's Gate feeling, where it's like, I just need to figure out what my player can do so they can figure out how they can interact with the world. Oh, I'll have this skill. Oh, I can do this thing.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think a lot of DMs play to that too.
And they do, it's just like, here, let me give you what you guys, and well, that's fine to a certain extent, but I really feel like in all the games that I've DM'd for, one of the biggest things that I've found is what really drives a group to want to come back, to want to keep gaming, want to keep doing what they're doing, is the investment in what they've built so far. It's not just, oh, I can throw around cool powers. It's like, no, this character is cool. This character I'm building something with, and I'm building like a person.
The story that we've created, the narrative.
And so when you can bring all of that together, and I think your class is a great way to start foundationally. Like, you can talk about like, hey, I really like the idea of an Echo Knight where I can have a copy of myself over here and do all this stuff, but then work backwards from there. I mean, like, okay,
Yeah.
what kind of character
How'd you get
would
there?
have that?
Right? Like how'd you get there? Because
Yes.
one of the things I've always liked to say about it is a class is part of your character's character, right? Like, and that's
Right.
how I've always looked at it. Like, when I play a rogue, I've always, even from my very first, even Dice, my very first character, all of my characters, have had a backstory, but the backstory has always included a motive. And this is where I think I kind of just did this subconsciously, but I've always had like a motive or a reason that led to where I'm at now, right? Like, so my, first character being a rogue had a, backstory I had to learn, right? So I was a fighter rogue. I was a fighter by trade, right? Like, I was trained to be a fighter by my dad, but stuff happened and then I had to learn how to survive. So that's how I became a rogue. I wrote that into my backstory about why I was dual classing, or multi-classing, not just saying I wanted to do both of these things and being like, hey, that's just a cool setup. But it meant that my character had to have a reason to know both of those skills, right? And that's what I mean by, like, it was part of my character's character. I was a fighter. I was a trained fighter, but I learned the skills to survive. So what did that mean? When I played my character, I wasn't just out to break into everything, right? I wasn't out to pickpocket everybody I could, but I knew exits very well. I knew how to get around very, very well. I knew who to talk to. Like, I had the rogue as my secondary class, but I wasn't just diving in to do everything a rogue could do. I only used what made sense for someone who learned how to survive and learn the tricks of the trade, right? I didn't steal just because I could. I only stole what we needed or when it was deserved.
Yeah.
I didn't just pickpocket who I needed. We only pickpocket guard, and that's when I would use it. But I wouldn't just pickpocket people for money. I wanted to be more of a professional. Like, again, I had trained to be a fighter, learn how to be a thief, and eventually, when I stopped having to survive that way, it was more of a, well, now I want to be known as a professional. Now I want to use these skills that I have, like I would a fighter. Like, you just get to that point where you're like, I'd rather be known as the guy that can get in anywhere than the one who just gets in everywhere.
Right.
That's where, and that's the guiding aspect of my character. And that's it, right? It's that concept of using your class. You don't have to, but I think a lot of people don't realize that you can use your class to build your background and your personality, right? And this is, I think, where we really wanted to like dive into it, because
you brought up a really interesting point that I, weirdly enough, hadn't thought of before we started this, but it's something that I kind of struggled with in playing a couple of games in my past, and it is narrative locked multi-classing.
oh, gotcha.
Meaning, you can't multi-class in X, Y, and Z, even though you can level up now, because there's nobody with this particular skill set to teach you said thing.
Yeah.
There is like, where would you have got this knowledge? It wasn't just divinely imprinted on you and whatnot. And
right, I do have, yeah. So he's referencing in Point, if you guys haven't seen those ones. So in High Point, there are certain classes and things that I've either built or that are of D&D that I don't allow players to have right out the gate, and I have basically what I call an unlocking process. And typically that unlocking process has 2 layers. It has to be unlocked by the player and the character. And essentially what that is in game, you have to be able to find it, right? So like, let's say for instance, Samurai. Samurai is not a class that would be available to anybody in High Point right out the gate, even though you could probably find, dozens of builds online that I would accept. And that's mainly because Samurai is not a very common class. It's, it's a regional thing. So unless you went there or met someone from that region who happened to have the skill sets, you wouldn't even know about it. Like your character just wouldn't have the knowledge, or you could read about it, but you wouldn't have understood it. So the in-game is like what you were saying, you have to discover it.
Question on that front, does that mean that, say I was dungeon diving and I was underground in a dungeon and I happen to level up while I'm down there, and I want to level up in Rogue. Now, that's not necessarily a locked class.
But you wouldn't be able to do it at that time.
I wouldn't have an instructor being able to teach me
Yeah,
that,
you wouldn't be able to do that. You would say that's what I'm going to do, but it officially wouldn't be accessible. Like, we'd level you up, but you wouldn't have access to any of those abilities until you left and spent some time to learn them. Now, granted, that's mostly true, especially for multi-classing if you haven't yet. Now, I get around that slightly, because I know some people don't like leveling up in the middle of a campaign. Mm-hmm. I do get around that slightly by my other additional rule, whereas I look at leveling up as things that you're doing in the meantime.
Very much
so. Like, if you're already the class, mm-hmm. you could level up in the middle of a dungeon because you've been practicing this thing. It's the level up as you finally being confident to go, you know what? I'm ready to do that in battle. That's what I look at leveling up. But yes, if you are not that class, you weren't practicing to be a rogue this whole time.
Yes.
You may have been, but until someone can basically be like, you got it, like, how do you know you're that class?
Theoretically, you have a rogue in the party who you could have been learning.
And then I would totally accept it, right? Like, so you're absolutely right. Is in those instances, I have locked cases, and then in other ones, I was more describing like the actual like specialty ones, which was probably not what you were going for. But yeah, I do have situational locks, and I call them situational locks, right? Because it's that concept of just because it's in the book doesn't necessarily mean it makes sense for your character to have. But yeah, just to finish that topic too, if you guys were interested. So the double lock point is like when I said it's player unlock, character unlock is like the player would have to find it in game with their character. The double unlock is that the player has to identify it. So you can meet an NPC and I could describe a very weird, sword about 3-4 feet long that has a oddly curved blade. Like, that's all I could tell you. If the player doesn't point that out and be like, what's his armor look like? Is that a samurai? Then that's a player. Like, the player has to identify it if I don't, right? So that's the player unlocking it. And then in-game, just because the player says, is that a samurai that you're describing? Mm-hmm. Like, congratulations, player unlock. But the character in-game has not figured that out yet. They don't know what to call it. They're just another NPC, right? The player in-game would have to get that knowledge. Further. Then the player would have it unlocked. So what do each lock mean? One, if it's locked for characters, that means that it's locked for all pre-generated characters. So if that means that the character itself, if you want to have a character and then they want a multi-class, that character's already been created. You have to go find that samurai and have them teach you. Then you can multi-class it. That character could. Mm-hmm. That's the character lock. And that happens to all pre-gen characters. If you already created a character, that character would have to go unlock it. The player unlock is different. If the player says, hey, that's a samurai, but your character hasn't figured it out yet, that character can't multi-class in it yet. But your next character you build would be able to.
That character technically never goes and unlocks it for that character, the player can then...
The player has unlocked it for all future character builds.
Got you.
But if you have 5 characters already built, none of them can get it. You've unlocked it, but each character still has to individually unlock it.
And even if you create a new character after that point, and that character doesn't start out of that class using samurai as this case, say they started out as a paladin and they wanted to multi-class into samurai. They wouldn't be able to multi-class into samurai unless they found a samurai.
Right. All pre-generated characters that don't start out at it, but once you've unlocked it as a player, you can start there, because the thing is, if you're going to start there, I put you there where it makes sense. Like, either you're the apprentice of that samurai you met, or I put you in the region, because that's how I do it, right? Players tell me what they want to make. I put them in High Point where it makes sense. But if the player doesn't have that unlocked, you don't just come to my realm and be like, I want to be a samurai. I'd be like, that's a level of gameplay we're not ready for yet, because it's just those, I lock certain things that I know are either high level gameplay or gameplay I'm not ready for until I have worked, like, I need to work with the player a little bit, right? And that's where the unlock in-game comes in, is by the time you unlock it, I'll have figured out whether or not we're compatible to get there. And then once you are, it's like, cool, you've unlocked it, let's play. And that I have multiple things locked like that. And I think that's kind of fun for specialty stuff. But again, going back to your question, I think you were referencing more of my situational locks, where if it doesn't make sense for you to be able to obtain something or have learned something, there's going to be those levels. Like, we actually had this conversation, a similar conversation in Discord recently from a viewer question, because Cosmic actually recently asked about like the Eye of Scrying or like the Eye of the Rune Keeper, and like how it meddles with scrying and everything. And this was kind of similar to where he was wondering, like, could you use Eyes of the Rune Keeper through scrying? And it's like, well, technically you could, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then, because like the Eyes of the Rune Keeper, you could like distance they see something.
That's the only thing. Eyes of the Rune Keeper, the way it reads to me is it just means that you can understand all languages.
Oh yeah, so Eyes of the Rune Keepers understand languages, but then he was wondering, can you like use scrying to then cast a spell or read like languages and what? And my look at that is like, if you look at like how scrying works, right? You're either looking at a creature, kind of like third person, but you're focused on the creature, right? So because it also mentions the like scrying also mentions how it's like very similar to crystal ball. So I kind of imagine like scrying is kind of like a crystal ball, right? You have a very, very clear image in the center, and then everything gets kind of hazy around the edge. I imagine scrying being like that. It's not like you are in the room getting the full view. It's like you either get to be following this person and you get to just look at them, so they're your focus. So even if they were holding a book,
through their eyes.
Yeah, so it's like they could be looking through a book, and you know that there's writing. You may be able to identify what type of writing, but it's not like you have clear access to the entire book. They are your target. And then the other aspect of scrying is that it puts you in a single location, and you can just look around as if you were standing there. And then my understanding of that is like, yes, technically you could look at a scroll that way, but my mentality was like, well, that'd have to be a lot of prep, right? First off, you can only be in one spot, so you have to know where that spot is, have prepped the scroll to be open and ready for you. And then I was thinking, well, how are scrolls usually read? Scrolls aren't a single piece of paper on a long sheet, right? It's a lot of text rolled up. So when you read a scroll, you're scrolling, you're scrolling it. You're literally like moving one side in and moving, the other side up, right? Like one's unraveling, one's raveling.
Interesting.
Right? Because that's how a scroll works. Like you open it up and
it's
like it's in both directions. So I look at it as, even if you had a scroll opened up, it would either be too long for you to see all of the text, or you wouldn't be able to manipulate it in order to continue reading, right? Like,
yeah.
So that's kind of where I was looking at like that question, and that's kind of what I mean by situational locks.
Just reading it is all you need to activate.
And I don't agree with that either, because if that's the case, I made the case there, because that's a good point, right? If you just read a scroll from a distance, can you cast it? I ruled no, because if that's the case, then it's just acting like what's the difference between, if I'm a wizard, right, that I have to memorize spells. This is an old school, like, second edition, but I have to memorize my spells. So I do that. But if I can also make an intelligence check to memorize a scroll, is that not just doubling my spell count? Because if I can remotely cast scrolls, if I just memorize what the scroll says, that means I can cast it remotely without the scroll, which means I just double, like, however many scrolls I'm allowed to memorize.
You don't need to, like, because does the scroll need to hear you?
Right. Well, and then there's the question of, okay, so if you have a scroll, because you know how normally you have to like do a scroll with like you have to do with this whole thing. But if I just have a copy of the scroll, like if some idiot who's not magical just wrote down every word for word, and I took that piece of paper, ran a mile away, and then read those words, that scroll goes off. There's too many
Yes.
misunderstandings of like how like
And
I
you
don't
could
understand how the magic would
you
work.
You could just quote the words from the scroll, and somebody's scroll in their pocket goes off.
And that's what I mean, right? It's like, does that mean that all spells
That's
are
why
just
I feel like there's
it-
got to be some intentionality. There's got to be some
I like
for me
well,
physical
because
contact.
it even talks about how scrolls, like either the entire scroll or the writing is used up. So it's like a material component. You have to be touching your material component. You can't just be 10 feet away from your material component and have it used, right? You can't be within 10 feet of a piece of mica and use shatter.
Which is why
Like-
I made the caveat that I feel like there's a lot of precedence for being able to do something like cast through a familiar. So if your familiar was present and you could perhaps speak through your familiar, maybe you could cast the scroll through.
I would allow it if your familiar was capable of magic, because again, the creature doing it still has to be capable of magic. You're just controlling them to cast the spell. But I would say that, but again, most spells or most scrolls can be cast by anybody, even if they're non-magical. So,
right.
Yeah, and realistically speaking, like, again, you're completing the circuit. It doesn't matter whose voice it is. It's like the voice of the person touch it. I agree. Like, there's a whole lot of things, but then you get into some really weird questions of like, well, at what point does my puppet not work? Like, if I dominate a person, does that work? Well, if I create a person, if I raise undead and then I dominate them, well, what if it's a golem? What if it's a puppet and then I dominate it? What if I animate and then use ventriloquism? If I animate a puppet, like animate object, and then use ventriloquism, and then I use clairvoyance, so I'm a mile away, but I'm animating this puppet who picks up a scroll, who I can see through clairvoyance, and I can speak through ventriloquism. Can I cast that scroll? You know what I mean? Like those are those questions that you really like people are going to eventually dig down to.
And if you want to get down to the
work?
weeds, we can go down that road if you're trying to do some spooky shit. But
Right. Well, and that's why I'm just not. I just feel like when it comes to that, it's a circuit. You and the circuit need to be complete. But that's off topic. But not really. But again, it's the situational locks that you were mentioning is something that I think is good. But yeah, going back to classes. Like the whole. I don't know how we actually got that far off topic actually. But yeah, going back to classes again, being part of the character's character, right? I gotta step out of the room real quick. I don't know if you want to mention anything else, but I do want the next part I want to go into is basically like why it matters for your background. That's the next stage.
Okay. No, I'm very. This mindset of it being very ingrained into who they are and what they do. I feel like too many people just want it as like an accessory. Like I'm just wearing a bunch of rings, or I got my chains or my grill or whatever, and that's how they view their class. It's just an accessory that allows them to do whatever they do. But when you build your character, and that's like what they do. Like for me, I growing up, I was a martial artist, and it was a lot more than just, hey, I know how to kick and punch now, and it's just a feature of Kage now that has the skills to chop and do things like that. It's a mindset. It's a way of life. It's why you do what you do, right? It's the attitude that you have approaching a lot of life, just in general, to be honest. And so for me, that was something that helped me understand the world around me. Right? And if you think about your class, if I'm a wizard, like, how do you understand the world around you differently than a monk understands the world around them, right? You might see things in equations and logic and step by step and this and that, and you can be any alignment and think like that, right? With different little sliders here and there. But when you're a monk, it's probably not like equations. It's probably more like flow and energy and you're feeling the world around you as you go, right? It's going to be a little bit different of a mindset because of how you go about viewing things. And I think it would be really valuable for a lot of these player characters, like we were talking about, if you take that into consideration when you're interacting with the world. It's like, I see the flow of your energy is off right now, and I really think we need to like stop or whatever. Whereas the wizard's gonna be like, hey, that does not compute. You are counterintuitively talking about what you just said a moment ago. We need to rethink this logic, like whatever it is.
So that's definitely one way to do it. I think that's definitely more of letting your personality get influenced by your class for sure. Like again, you can go the full logic route if you're a wizard versus like the more touchy-feely route if you're the monk, which I totally get. But that is exactly why class is so important to background, because like Kage was saying, it's the approach that you have to things, right? Like one thing that I find unique is if you're going to choose something like a wizard, right? Something not like a sorcerer or a warlock who got their magic, but a wizard, a mage, a standard mage that has the concept that you studied for this magic, right? It's cool that you chose that class, but it's weird when people choose that class to play a character that in all respects would not have been able to handle school, right? Chaotic, forgetful, impulsive. Like if you play a character, but you have this, you supposedly play a class that needed a lot of discipline, it kind of was like, how did that make a lot of sense? And to me, it's like, yeah, most people overlook that, but that's what I mean by like, why would it be important? Because if you have something like a warlock, right? Someone who's willing to take risks, someone who probably has something that they, like, again, inflicting it upon like your personality. Like, why did you choose to be a warlock? What was going on in your life that you needed this power? What is your ultimate goal? Do you have that agenda? Did you complete that agenda? And now you're just living after it, realizing that you're happier, or are you not happier because you have all this power, you got your agenda done, but now you're still just being, you're still just living and you're still not happy about it, right? Or a sorcerer, like everyone's hated you your whole life. You just naturally had magic and all of these people had to study for years. Like those are those aspects that I don't think people really look at, like how that would have affected your character, right? If you don't, I'm not necessarily suggesting that people have to do what I did and go the whole route of like explaining every piece. But when you choose a class, I believe that you could justifiably make the argument that there's a lot of, I don't even want to say expectations, but there's a lot of assumptions that one could make about that history, right? Again, like if you're a wizard, you're more likely to have spent years, not necessarily isolated, but years studying. You're methodical, right? Like you were saying, you're logical. So to play that very erratically, very impulsively doesn't sound as much like a wizard who would have spent years in school. But if your backstory says, after years in school, I went mad and couldn't handle it anymore, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, but that's what I mean.
Or
that's
if
something
you're real good, the whole acting chaotic is a facade, and you're really, everything you're doing is incredibly calculated and incredibly intentional, and you just need everyone to think you're crazy.
I had a character like that once. Spaz was a great character. But exactly. This is what I mean by like, how can choosing your class affect it, right? Because going into something like, let's talk about fighter. I think we had this conversation right before stream. Like, so how many people think about the fact that when you choose fighter, you usually choose, you can choose your weapon, you can choose all of this other stuff. But how many people really think about like, you can have a backstory about how you became a fighter, right? Like, I was a backstreet brawler, got into, blah, blah, blah. Like how you got here. But like, do people really think about that duality between, did you become a fighter because you're strong, or are you strong because you're a fighter, right? That's a big question I don't think a lot of people ask themselves. What about your backstory made you predisposed to becoming a fighter? You know what I mean? Were you in a lot of fights as a kid, or did you want to join the military? Did you just want to defend people? Did you, were you just rude and aggressive and just wanted to beat people up? Were you the bully, right? Like there's all of these things where choosing a fighter comes with a lot of potential, because what type of fighter, what you, and even further, what you studied. Because we were talking about not just like the predisposition, what kind of childhood or what kind of history would cause someone to go be a fighter as an adventurer, but then even as simple as choosing your specialties, right? I think should inflict upon your personality a little bit in the character, because we all think of fighters as like the aggressives, the intimidators, right? Fighters are going to be aggressive and intimidating, or barbarians are going to be intimidating. Paladins are going to be righteous. Rogues are going to be greedy. But if you took two fighters and you had one fencer, and then you had, a fencer in leather armor, or studded leather armor at best, right, with a rapier, and then you do another fighter build who's in plate armor and a two-handed greatsword. Obviously, mechanically, they fight differently, but I think everyone just says, well, you're a fighter, right? You look at that, you look at those people and you're like, well, you're fighters. But realistically speaking, both of them have had a completely different progression to this point. You know what I mean? The fencer, in my opinion, would be like personality-wise, I think of a fencer as someone who would want the fight to be fair. They want a one-on-one. They're that kind of personality that I would kind of expect you want someone to be on your best. Maybe you'll do something a little bit cheeky, like stab at their foot or something to get them off guard. But the idea is that you want the cunning, you want the finesse in a fight. Whereas someone in full plate armor with, a great sword or even, like a warhammer, their mindset is damage now, quick. Just fight over. People in plate armor and those heavy swords, they are not there to fight for an hour. They're not there to fight for 10 minutes. They want one and done. Those people are there to smash. Like it's, like you said, Hulk smash, right? It's that idea that if I'm carrying a warhammer, if I'm carrying a two-handed great axe and I'm in full plate armor, I'm not out here all day in the sun. I am not out here holding this armor up and holding this blade up for very long. I am here to just do which is why you typically see that represented as the tank, right? You get in the middle of combat and you stay put and you just wail until the thing's dead. Mm-hmm. But someone with a rapier is not going to be that way, right? So I look at it as, yes, you're both a fighter, but those little details to me are great indicators and great cues on how you can play that personality, because both of those exact characters, they both may just be fighters, but when they walk into a bar and get hassled, I expect them to act differently. You know what I mean? Very true. You would expect the rapier guy not to be up in their face and be like, I expect him to be like, would you like to take this outside? I don't mind doing a duel, but you expect the other guy to just flatten him right then and there. And I don't necessarily mean that you have to be that, aggressive if you're the bigger fighter, but those backgrounds, right? The rapier fighter, the way that they train, why they became a rapier fighter and not, clad in plate armor, there's a reason, right? And that's what I mean by when we look at the choices that we make for the class. Are we thinking about all of these things? And most people, let's face it, we're not. I don't even actively think about all of these things. But in there, when I create my character, the class does dictate how I want to play it, how I think about the character, how I think about their attitude, how I think about the way that they approach things, right? Again, people who sorcerer, I expect to be more confident and be more cocky. Not necessarily full on, I can do anything, whatever. But in that personality, I don't expect them to hit the books. I don't expect them to be like, let's go to the library. I kind of expect them to have the mindset of like, guys, we got this. Like, we'll do it. You know what I mean? They're like, I don't need to know why we'll do it. Because again, that's the lifestyle. You just have magic. A warlock, I expect them to, or again, I wouldn't expect, but stereotypically, or if you look at like what's behind a warlock, you could expect them to be more risk-taking. It would be weird to have a warlock who's super timid. You called upon an elder being for immense power for some reason, but you're worried about getting caught, or you're worried about tipping off the guard, or you're worried about, like, you know what I mean? Like, It's weird that you were able to muster up the courage to make a literal eternity, altering deal with some unknown entity, but you won't steal a loaf of bread. It doesn't seem to. And now, again, I'm not saying that these different classes require a certain personality, but a lot of the times the personalities don't seem to fit with how you came here. Like, how did you get to this personality with that background or with that class?
How do you explain becoming who you are? How do you articulate the person that you are today with a background that is this person?
Yeah, like, would be contrary to it.
Exactly.
Take paladins versus clerics. Paladins are just beefier clerics, right? They're more aggressive. They're the fighters of clerics. But you also, again, not always, but there's kind of a stereotype, kind of an expectation that they are the holier than thou, even in the religious community. You know what I mean? As if they have a deeper connection. If it's from a divine, they have a bigger devotion. If it's from the oath, which is now more popular, it's because, again, clerics have an ideal that they want to live up to. Paladins are like, this right here is my life. You know, that oath, whether it's from, you know, a divine being, or whether it's just an oath to you know, end starvation, or the, you know, the oath of throwing it back, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, right? But that's the idea. You expect that paladin to have a desire. So why would you have a paladin that's whatever, like that just has no care for anything, right? Like you wouldn't expect to run into a paladin that just never has an opinion. Right? Now, you don't need to be the guy, you don't need to play the paladin that's always right and who won't listen to anybody. But you would expect a paladin to, if you, again, you had a point to say that is the one thing you were going to prove to everyone that is your life goal, but you don't have any other opinions on anything else. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
You could, and again, if you justify it, if you have a backstory that makes sense, I'm cool with it. And I'm not saying that not doing these things are bad, but there's a missed opportunity there to envelop that part of your character, right? Like, why was this so important? It's not just don't just choose an oath. Like, again, the whole point of this conversation is don't just choose it to get the benefits. Like, incorporate it. Why did it matter to that character?
Bring it to life for some reason. Like, I like the idea, because we talk about a lot in just us as DMing. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing makes sense. Like, and I feel like the player characters can do the same thing. Is you have control over your character to make it make sense. And if you want to go down that route, that's great. But, you know, sometimes it does kind of feel like work. But honestly, I mean, I'm the type of player that really enjoys that type of work.
Yeah.
Where I'm sitting here and I'm investigating into my character as to why this makes sense for them, why going down this road is what they would do. Like, so often I think about Davd, right? And you've heard me say this a lot. It's like, I'm very upset at what Davd's about to do right now, because it's not what Kage wants to do right now. But that's because I've gone through every pathway in my mind. I'm like, okay, I know these are the important things to Davd. All right, he would go down this path. He would go down this path. But there's no reason he would go down that path.
Even if it's obvious to you as the player.
Exactly. I can see things all day long. I can understand things all day long. I can want things all day long. But like, at a certain point, for me, my characters, they take on a life of their own. They take on a personality of their own. And I am just a curator of it. I'm just the person that understands what that personality is, and I'm the one communicating it to everybody else. And so, you know, I just gotta let them do what they're gonna do.
Right.
I got to, but
well, and you know, again, applying this to more and more classes, like this can also not just be like, yes, we're suggesting that this makes a more enriching character, and this advice typically falls for people who want to get involved with the character. If you're doing one shots, if you just want to play just for the thrill of creating the characters, that's obviously totally a different thing. But this could also just be used as advice for if people want to know how to make more enriching backstories, right? Because it's one thing, like, you know, D&D has backstory or backgrounds, right? Like, you can make a background, and it gives you some. I don't like the way the backgrounds are, but it gives you some ideas to pull from. But, you know, again, I think people look at that and they're like, okay, that gives me some kind of an idea of like what I should do. But I still get questions from players on, like, you know, how can I build a better backstory, or how can I understand how my character should be more. And again, I think class is an overlooked aspect, because I think, just again, we've mentioned this before, so many people choose the class for what you get out of it, right? What you can do with it. But no one really looks at like what that represents about you. You know, again, like Rogue's a great one to play with, because Rogues have everything from, you know, the young scoundrel who's just, you know, causing mayhem, to the people that are just trying to survive, and it's just the only way that they can, to, you know, professionals, right? Like, you can have a rogue that's literally just wants to be hired as a professional, you know, like a cat burglar, right? Where it's like, they're like the name, like they have a secret name, and you have to do these things to, you know, be able to reach out to them, you know, light a candle, put it on this side, but, you know, like do all of these things. And then, like, you know, you can contact them and hire them, and then basically be known as the guy that can get you the unobtainable. Like if
Right.
someone stole something from you, I can get it back. You need to stop a war.
Interesting. I like that idea.
Like
where
again,
you're
not
just the dude that like that would be a cool backstory if that is.
That's the
if
idea.
That's what you did.
I'm
I'm
the
just
guy
stole stuff back from somebody.
And that's my point. Is like those are the things where it's like when you choose the rogue class, it's like, yeah, you can pickpocket, but like I said, there's so many things that you can do, but I choose which ones I want to do that made sense for why my character would do them. Just because I could pickpocket as a rogue doesn't mean, like, again, if I want to be the professional, if I want to be the guy that's known that there's not a place that I can't get in and out of, right? If that's what I want to be known as, I'm the guy that, you need something, there's no place that you can put it that I can't get to. And that's what people hire me for. They hire me to get in or out of something. So why would I learn pickpocketing? Like, I may have it, and yes, maybe on a rare occasion pickpocket a key off of a guard. But I mean, why would I go into marketplaces and pickpocket? It is not something that makes sense for that character to do, so I wouldn't do it. But again, using that the class to your advantage. If you don't know, how else to fill it in, right? Magic users. When was the first time you learned that you could do magic? How did you get the affinity for magic? Did you learn it?
Your inspiration story, what motivates you to be this magic user, or maybe you hate magic but you're doing it for some other reason.
And then again, how did look at the class and what what it does? Like again, we've talked about like warlocks. You made a pact. That's an entire part of your backstory. Just why did you? Again, you don't have to write like paragraphs and paragraphs, but like, why did you do it? What was the reason you made that deal? If you had to go to school, if you chose a background that says that you had to study for years, why did you study? Were you again, if you want to be that player who says like, I don't want to act like I'm a smart pants, like be like, then you could say that, well, my parents forced me to go to school. It was go to school or work at the family business. So I went to school, I learned how to do magic, but I'm not really, a bookworm. I just did what I had to do. Now I'm out in the real world and I can do magic, but I don't want to stay in school, right? That's a backstory.
And
done.
It's a great reason to have that as your base class, and then you immediately multi-class into something else because you never wanted it in the first place.
Or it allows you to not act like the methodical wizard because you're just like, I did that for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. I'm like, I'm done. I just want to go live, but I'm just really good at magic, right? So, I'm trying to think of like other classes that we talked about monk, right? Monk is a really unique one because it's a martial class, but asking yourself, this is one of those unique ones where you get a different chance. Like with fighter, with mage, you usually get to ask yourself, like, how did you come across magic? Why did you continue to, develop it? But with monk, there's very little of a question. It's almost like you could ask yourself, well, why did you become a monk? Or you could ask the question, what made you a monk? Like, was it cultural? Was it family? Like monk seems one of those classes where it's not, it's blurring the lines between class and background. It is a class, it has class features, but
right.
It's less of a thing you go out and pursue. It's usually something that you kind of fall into. Now, granted, you could go and travel somewhere and become a monk.
I do like the idea that I really feel like the energy that the monk class, well, at least in 5th edition, was going for was more akin to martial artist. And so I feel like that there's a lot broader reasons to become a martial artist than there is to be a monk. Because when you think of monk, I think of like I went to like some Shaolin temple and
that's that's the point I was getting to, and I agree with you. I like what you were going with that.
But I think that as long as you think about Bruce Lee. I don't think Bruce Lee was ever a monk.
No, I don't think anyone would call him. Well, you would call him the class of monk.
Yes,
but he was definitely not a monk.
Right, and so like he was in the public eye. He did all this stuff. He hung out with people, but he learned to be a martial artist, and he had a lot of reasonings for becoming a martial artist that were his own, that were family oriented. Again, I think a lot of it was culturally based and stuff like that.
So should that be not like a conversation, but should they rename monk to martial artist, and monk is now a subclass?
I think that would be
because they've always had martial weapons, but a martial artist.
I don't understand those distinctions. When you say martial weapons versus simple weapon, like I don't understand what they're supposedly.
We should do it. Can you write that in the Discord? That's going to be. Let's do that as a history of martial and simple, like the history of weapons.
Okay.
And that will be what we talk about is like the breakdown of all of the additions of what were simple, what was martial, what was the difference, how did it change, how many weapons there used to be, how many weapons there are now. That's going to be a fun episode. But exactly, right? Like you have all of these weapon types, but a fighter is funny because like you hear the term fighter, and in D&D you immediately assume weapon. But you don't have a martial artist, you have a monk, and you immediately assume hand to hand, but that's martial artist. But a martial artist also does hand to hand and weapon. So it's like there is this weird distinction. It's almost like fighters should have access to like simple weapons, and you should make those the more standard fighting weapons, and then martial artists should have access to like martial weapons, and those are the more like keen ones that you would expect to be on
Have some
like,
specific training towards or for or something like
yeah,
that.
right. Like you could have short sword, long sword, rapiers, all of that for like fighter, but then you have like a actual like dagger fighting would be for martials. Like dagger would be a martial weapon, or I mean, I guess a dagger would be a simple weapon. I'd have to actually see all the weapons listed
It'd be
out.
interesting,
But
yeah.
like a bow staff would be a martial weapon, not a simple weapon.
Yes, especially as a weapon like that. Like a club is different.
Yeah.
Like I can just smack somebody over the head with something versus using a staff as a staff.
Speaking of which, this is also one that we brought up before stream that we wanted to talk about too, is another way to work the class into your backstory and into the build is also understanding, weapons and armor, right? That come with it, right? Because like I brought up earlier, when you're a rapier fighter, you're going to have like studded leather or less, right? You want to be moved, you want to be nimble, you want to be fast. You're not going to be carrying around bulky, heavy weights. You may be well fit, but you're not going to be a slow lumbering person. You want to be quick. Whereas if you are carrying around a lot of armor and a lot of heavy weapons, you're not as worried about being fast, right? So that can bleed into your personality, right? The type of actionable person that you are. If you are, in your fighting stance, if you are fast and you are quick, you are more likely to, think that way. You are more likely to be quick-witted. You're more likely to not necessarily be impulsive, but you're more likely to take action quicker. Whereas the other people are looking for the weakness. They're waiting for that moment to strike. So you may be more likely to hold off. When the party's asking, like, hey, should we break into this place and just go barging in and demand answers, or should we scout the place out? If you have those two fighters, like I talked about before, the one in plate armor and the rapier fighter, the rapier may be like, let's just bash the guy, just bash in the door. Let's go talk to him. And this guy might be the one who's going, well, let's find out where the guards are. Let's find out what their shifts are. Maybe we can find a weak point. Because that's what, like, you would think he's all about smashing, but his mindset is, I wait for the weak moment because every hit counts. You might want to
be very tactical about it. It's like, I got all this armor. I can't be wasting all this movement. I got to be very precise with
exactly,
all my stuff.
because you think it's all about smash and kill, but his thing is like, yes, it is smash and kill, but I wait for my one chance to do that, whereas you take every chance.
You have all that energy and just like, oh, I'll outlast him.
Well, because it's all swordplay. You're trying to just wait. You're waiting for the moment to open, whereas this guy, you're both waiting for the moment to open. The rapier's forcing the moment. The other guy's just waiting for it to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the things that you can add into those personalities. And again, weapon choice, armor choice. These are things that come with that class. And those classes, I mean, again, if you're more likely in armor, you're probably going to be more confident, more likely to be aggressive. If you tend to not wear armor, you're going to, again, think about when you're in combat, when you're day to day, if you the type of armor you wear, we know that wizards are very rarely aggressive. Wizards aren't walking around punching people in the face, getting in people's faces. Why? Because we have the stereotype of glass cannon.
Because they're squishy,
right? But that doesn't mean that you can't be an aggressive, wizard. But it makes more sense that you're not, because you know your weaknesses. So that's the idea. When you choose a class, if you have a class that only gets light armor, you're probably less likely to be the aggressive type of person, right? The hit first and ask questions later. Mm-hmm. But the more you have those like big brute type armors, that is kind of, the MO that people expect. It doesn't have to be played, but these are the questions that you can ask yourself when you're choosing those classes, right? One of them that I think everybody naturally does this with, I think actually there is one class that I think everybody just without thinking does this with, and it's Druid. Most every person who picks Druid kind of instinctually has the air of protector, I would say. It's not always it's not always nature, but every person that plays a druid,
edition,
the druid always tends to be, it has
Druid's
this aura.
My favorite class.
Yeah.
And I will say like I have 2 primary druids. One is Venla, which and the other is Yogg, right? Venla is a shepherd druid, right?
Yep.
And Yogg is a moon druid.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them are very much protectors. One is a protector of like more like the circle of life type deal, and the other is a protector of non-humanoid life.
Okay.
Right?
Nice.
And so it's very much they care about animals and creatures and nature and it just being what it is. Because again, much more in touch with like the moon druids are all about wild shaping and turning into other
so
creatures.
it's the kingdom, the animal kingdom.
Yes.
And that's it, right? Like everybody that I've seen
feel that vibe.
Yeah, everyone I've seen play, sometimes you'll get the traditional ones where they're just all about protecting, like this is my forest, or you can't hurt that, it's like if you run over or stomp on a flower, I'm gonna be mad at you. Like they usually have that, or they just in general they have a pet, or they care about wildlife, they care about they care about nature and the forest nearby. Like everyone that's played a druid that I've ever gamed with as a DM and as a player or represented, they all have, even if it's just with the party. Even when there's a druid in a party and they don't have some big thing that they're all about, they are basically the party mother, right? The druid is the one that's like, don't you fucking touch these people, right? They're the ones that kind of come in clutch. Again, they're the ones that like are usually doing nothing until someone gets hurt, and then they're like, oh, I go into a bear. It's like, again, it's literally mama bear mode, and every druid plays this, but that is what I'm talking about. If you actually apply the class to your background, that's what you get, and we do that stereotypically with druid.
I just had this crazy idea because we're talking about multi-classing and how you play that into your background. There's this subclass of druid that's like a fire druid basically.
Ooh.
And it's usually not very common. Like you almost never have like fire spells as a druid because you want to protect nature.
Well, especially with nature, that's usually the last thing you want to do. That's interesting.
So I had this idea of like a druid that had their like home village like burned down, and so as they grow up, not only are they a druid, but they find their way into becoming a paladin with an oath of vengeance to the people that burned their original village, right? And so you have the wild mother or something be their God,
so what about
whatever.
this? This could be your BBEG, or it could be a player. So you take the fire druid, right? And you spin it. Either they're the BBEG or they're a player, but you do the evil guy's the good guy in his own story. Whether it's the burned down village or whatnot, but what if it's the fire druid, but their belief system isn't about harm and isn't necessarily like I want your stuff to burn. I want you to be without. But what if it's more of I'm a druid, I understand the life cycle, and fire is not only purifying, but it's beneficial. Like
it
what if
facilitates rebirth.
So what if you're the type
Very
of druid
so.
that like your backstory is that you would go from forest to forest and do clearings, like you would do like controlled clearings,
purges,
and then you could even do the tragedy where one day it got out of control and you burned down you burnt something down, or that's just what you do. You just go and you try to tell people like the benefit of not letting it overdo, and then you just do that. Like that's your thing. You use fire to basically help things regrow.
Yeah,
because that's a big deal, right? Forests forests need that. They do. That's why lightning is beneficial. Like forest fires is it will actually clear it and it will regrow better. It'll give more nutrients.
And I think that was like the original mindset of the subclass, like kind of that.
So imagine a BBEG where what it looks like is they're just this psycho druid or firemancer that's just going around burning things. But what they're doing is like, they're just like, you people don't understand. The world is becoming overgrown. It's dangerous. I see a future that, we all, are suffocating. So like their mindset is they're trying to save the world by burning like selectively. But of course, no one understands it, so no one wants to almost like how Thanos was presented.
Yes.
No one understands him, right? He's just misunderstood. He's really here for your benefit. You don't understand. He's here for your benefit.
He just wants to help, guys.
Yeah.
He just wants to be your friend.
So imagine that. Imagine a BBEG or a player who was this fire druid with the Thanos complex of you don't understand. I'm only here to burn half your forest and you will be fine.
I imagine like a party where every time they leave, there's some like crazy fire, and like nobody ever necessarily associates it with that party because they're always gone when it happens.
But it's always the druid that
this druid is just like, this place needs to be cleansed.
Like it could be a crazy thing, or it could be like an honest to God, like people don't understand. Like you always have an affinity to figure out when fire would be best.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the
you give him like you give him like the special ability to like once a day they could make a roll, and if any like they could make a roll and have an intuition for something. So it's like, yeah, you're about to leave town and they go burn a building down, and then like it collapses and everyone's like, oh my god, why would you do that? But then you find out but then they find out when they like, you know, investigate after they put out the fire that the like you burnt, you know, you half burnt it down, they put the fire out, but what it did was it burnt down half the walls, revealing like structural damage, and it would have like collapsed into the 3 other buildings, but by you burning it, it only collapsed straight down. Like, but you didn't know that, like, as the druid, you didn't know that. It was just the DM being like, this looks like it's good.
I remember Donnie Darko, and he kept on having all these like weird whispering things into him, and one of them was I swear he burned some dude's house down. And when they burned this dude's house down, it revealed like a secret hidden
thing. The pedophile dude.
Yes,
yeah.
that weird, like, I was like, yo, that it's some force, like, you could do some cool stuff with that, for real.
And that's what I'm thinking, like, you know, like, using the class can be just so enriching, because asking yourself, why did my character get led to this, right? Like, again, druids are also one of those unique ones where I don't think anybody acknowledges that druid is probably the most fuzzy between class and background. Like monk, you typically expect that you just always wear a monk, but realistically, like, who becomes a druid, right? Most people are just like, druid and monk are those two classes where it's like, you really don't become them. Like, you can multi-class into them, but you really, like, character-wise, most people just are them. Like, it's again, they're the two that really are what people, I think, naturally
that you
utilize
see
as a background.
Ranger multi-classing into druid, but it would be really interesting to see like somebody like a barbarian, although there are paths for a barbarian to go into druid.
I mean, there's nothing that's off limits. It's just, it's like that idea of asking yourself how you got to this point. You know, again, asking yourself if you're ready to multi-class doesn't make sense. Like, you know you want to multi-class and you know what would work, right? You're like, oh, these are the powers that I want. But like, storyline wise, you know, how many people think, like, storyline wise, like, at this point in my character's life, like, does this make sense for him to do? Or how would I, like you know, like the situational locks that we were talking about before, does this make sense for him to be able to multi-class into this right now? Like, you know, if you're a fighter and your entire game, if you go up to like level 10 as a barbarian or a fighter, and all you guys have ever done is dungeon delve and go to arenas and just, you know, do all these battles, and then at level 5, and you turn to level 6 and you're like, I want to get a class in rogue, be like, when have you ever been sneaky? Like, literally, you just kick down every door, you kill everything in every dungeon, you hit before you ask questions, and you go to arenas and just make money off of murdering people. When have you ever done anything? Like, so it's almost like you want the rogue for these benefits in battle, but how have you ever represented being a rogue? How does it make sense your personality would learn these traits?
You know, and my mindset is like, okay, because I'm the type of person, I love synergy. And so if I want a multi-class like that, it's usually because there's some synergistic reason why that would help my class. And so if that's the case, then those things that I would hopefully want out of that class are things that I'm demonstrating are a part of,
like, represented in your character already.
Representative of, like, the direction my character's going in the first place. So hopefully that's shining through. But if it's not, then that is when the question really comes to, like, why are you doing this? Are you just doing this because it
has that feature?
Cool?
Yeah, it has that. Yeah, because again, there's nothing wrong with min-maxing. It's just that if you're looking for a way to make your choices matter more, you know, these are the kind of questions that I think we would ask ourselves. Is just like, you know, our artificers are also a really interesting class, because that can tell you a lot. Like, you could get a lot about your character's personality. You know, why are you an artificer? How do you want to explain how you can see how magic works, right? What drives you to continue tinkering? Are you working on the ultimate creation? Do you have an invention that you want to make? Or whether the player has it in mind, but you could say, my artificer, just since he was a kid, he has this invention he's making, and he's just trying to get as good as he can to make this thing. And you never have to explain it. It could be the MacGuffin of your character, but that's the point. You can just say, well, I'm an artificer, so since birth, or since I was a kid, I've just always wanted to make this unobtainable item, and so I'm just learning. Like, and forever it can be a MacGuffin until you make a decision on what item it is, right? But that's what I mean by using that class. Instead of just being like, well, I'm an artificer because it gets these feats, be like, So you're telling me that in your entire life you were just like, oh, I'm just going to go to college real quick and get that just so I can learn how to do this thing over here. Like, there are people that do that, but does it make sense for you? Just like one day you're just like, wake up and go, I want this. I'm going to go to school for 2 years, learn this coding, get a degree, come back and so I can write this tiny program and then I'll move on with my life. Like, you don't do that. You don't go and get a 2-year degree just to write yourself like, an app that can,
line of code.
Yeah. Like, it's like, I don't like how my alarm works. I want to write a new code for this alarm. Go to school for 2 years. Now I have my own alarm app. Okay, move on. Like, why would, but that's like multi-classing for a single feat. That's like taking a single level in something to get like one feat. And you're just like, so you went to college so you could have an alarm app instead of just the million other ways you could have done that. And that's how I feel for, when you don't pick something that logically makes sense. That's how it feels for me, is you just diverted energy and effort into something that could have been done differently and more expanded the character.
That intrigues me to ask if something like that. So like, say, because in 5th edition it's fairly common for people to do like a 1 or 2 level dip into a different class just to get a certain feature. Like, hey, I want action surge. Hey, I want cunning action. Hey, I want. Now, would it be possible to say that, like, lore-wise, like character-wise, it's like I'm not technically a multi-class. I'm still a fighter. I just learned how to do this thing that, generally speaking, rogues can do.
And well, exactly. So that is part of the reason why in High Point you can gain additional standard and non-standard feats for purposes like that, right? Like, I want to save people from wasting that time and effort, because I feel like that's a loss. Like, wasting a whole level just for a single feat, it's like, if you really want it that badly, let's talk about how we can make it make sense for your character, instead of you doing this entire multi-class. Because to me, multi-classing is it's a dedication, right? It's your character. Like, you don't, again, taking one level in fighter means essentially the equivalent of, you took a semester, I don't know what they are actually called, but you took a stint series session at a studio. Like modern day, that would be like, I want to, like, if I want to do cunning action, right? That's like saying, well, I really want to learn how to do like a proper back kick, so let me go spend the next 6 months, sign up for Taekwondo just to learn that back kick.
Yeah.
And then that's cool. I'm going to do my other stuff. I needed to learn that back kick. Why would I waste 6 months when I could just go to someone like you or go to YouTube and just learn an equivalent back kick that's not the back kick everyone in Taekwondo can do, but it's a back kick that works for me. And then I can just move on. That makes more sense. And so when you're talking about, like, is there anything wrong with dipping? No, there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually part of the reason why I also like having a tertiary class. Like, I don't mind tri-classing for that kind of reason. It's just not my intention, right? But for me, again, this isn't really about what you should do or what, what you should restrict. It's just more about, if you want another way to make your character more, well-rounded, or just if you've ever not thought about it. I kind of want to just get this conversation of, going out, right? Because, I would prefer to, like you were saying, I would prefer to prevent someone from dipping into a class just for a single feat.
Right.
I'd much rather try to reward them by giving that feat as something that they can do, again, uniquely as their character. Again, kind of like, like the bending classes. It's one thing to say, this is roughly what the power can do, versus, well, you learn how to do that with it, so therefore you can do that.
Right.
Another person, if they come up with the idea, can also, we've now established, can do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who picks this power up is going to be like, oh, I do that. Well, why would you? He invented that on his own. How did you get that knowledge, right? I don't like this idea that, well, if one person did it, it obviously makes sense that everybody would have thought about that. It's like, that's not how it works. I mean, that's why not everybody can invent toothpicks, right? Like,
look at how the actual, that's one of the coolest things that I saw when I started watching The Legend of Korra, is that you got to see how bending evolved over the years. Because, like, when you were doing like the original Avatar, The Last Airbender, a lot of the bending kind of looks similar, just big rocks and all that stuff. But it expanded. Like Toph was like an engineer. She was like metal bending, being able to do stuff with specific pieces, being able to, and everyone took their stuff a unique way. And so,
and we see that. I mean, we see that in real life history, right?
Yes.
With technology, with music, everything gets taken to a new level because someone wants something different. Someone wants to push the boundaries, right?
And that's what
this is
characters are for.
Exactly. I mean, that's what the whole our whole purpose of Beyond the Book is, right? It's learning that what the book has is a good standard, but that doesn't make it doesn't mean that you can't, like, so many people want to be unique with what's in the book, but it's like you don't have to be chaotic about your combination to be unique, right? And that's where I think, like, it is nice to be able to go beyond the book sometimes, give someone, like an extra feat or anything. Because yeah, why would somebody, like, again, learning to be a fighter just to get action surge.
Yeah.
It's like, it's more like I would want to break that down and go, okay, what do you really want action surge for? Like, what is it? Do you want an extra attack or do you want an extra action? Like, break it down, right? If a rogue's like, well, if I get action surge, I could do like 2 backstabs. Like, okay, let's talk about you getting a second backstab. Let's talk about what situations make sense and not about you wasting an entire level and your character's in-game time. And just in general, why waste this opportunity when it doesn't make sense to just get that? Like, if you want the surge just because you want an extra action, that's one thing, right? If you just really want to push the boundaries. But if, like, for me, I would just ask, like, what exactly are you trying to pull off? And if it was a rogue, basically like, no, really, I just want to be able to do 2 backstabs. I think that would be dope if I could backstab in action surge and backstab again. I'd be like, okay, well, how about this? Let's work it into your next level up that you're working on the feat double backstab. You have to have 2 weapons equipped, and let's just say you have to have a higher roll, and you can get the second backstab off. You know what I mean? Like, it's with your offhand, so we'll just increase the roll by 3. So as long as you're dual equipped and you successfully get your first backstab, you get a second chance with like a -3 penalty to backstab a second time, right? Okay. I would work that in instead of having them go in multi-class to get the action surge. Like, that's how I would approach it, because that to me sounds a little bit better and a little bit more like how you would want the character to progress, instead of having someone go and again learn a whole discipline,
right?
Just to get, like, again, why would I go and learn a whole martial arts for 1 move? Doesn't make any sense.
Very much.
So. If I had studied Taekwondo for 20 years, would I go and learn karate for a year for 1 move, like for one like hold or 1 grab or something? It doesn't make any sense. If I wanted to learn them both holistically and collaborate them, you learn them side by side.
Exactly.
But you don't, like, again, and we see that with mixed martial arts. You see these people take multiple disciplines, but it's not like they only go to 1 or 2 classes of that discipline to learn 1 move and then never take it again. They learn both of them wholly, right? They thoroughly, and then combine them. And that's where I think that's what multi-classing should be reserved for, is you are diving into a multiple of disciplines. You're not just cherry picking a maneuver.
Right.
And I think that's where I like to, like, separate them out. What's going on, Pokeniter? Nice to see you here. Trying to think, again, Bard. Bard is another great opportunity to take your class and build out your backstory, your personality, build out that character, right?
Yeah, Pokeniter just gave us a subclass of of Bard that we reviewed not too long ago.
Yeah, it's like choosing, and again, even subclasses is like, it's so funny. People choose subclasses for the specialties, right? For the focus. Like, oh, look, I want to be the subclass because it focuses, again, on these abilities. But how many people, like, think about how many subclasses really kind of show off how, not single-minded, but how focused your character should be. Like, if you took a subclass, it usually means that your character had a very specific, like, affinity for something, right? They had a pull to it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if you as the player have that, where is that in your character, right? Are you playing your character as just any other character that just can do different things? Or are you recognizing that character has an affinity, has an interest, has a unique ability with certain things, and are you leaning into that? You know what I mean? If you went with a specialty that's all about the weather, don't you think that you would be constantly aware of it? Like your character would be more knowledgeable about how the weather works, and just like again, it's that thing of like, if you go to a new place, wouldn't your character want to like just know that? Like they would kind of be aware of how those things work in their sphere of knowledge. But if you're just taking it for the feats and the abilities, where does that leave your character's interest? Why did they study all of that? What was the drive? What was the motivation? What was the history that got you there? And how did it change you? Again, we've talked about weapons, we've talked about armor, but training. How did the training change you? It's like, you want to be a fighter. Did you try to be a fighter because you wanted to join the army? Did you want to join the city guard? And again, in your backstory, if you've said I was a fighter, and then it's like, how did you become a fighter? It's like, well, I joined the army, or I joined a army. It's like, so granted, we've both been in the military. There's all different sorts, but there are stereotypes that no matter what sort you are, every single person in the military has met someone of the stereotype, right? Like, not everyone has met people that aren't the stereotype, but guaranteed everyone has met the stereotype, because it's that prevalent.
It's very common.
If you choose a class that has, and you've chosen a way to make it make sense, right? I joined a military, or I went to school. This is why I'm this class. Are you taking that experience and applying that to the character as well? Again, wizards who went to school, are you applying the fact that you were very rigid and that you were in that school system and that you know how that works? If you were in a military or, the guard, you were probably used to being hazed. You were probably used to aggressive mindsets. You don't have to be that way, but your character would be used to it, right? They would know certain things. I mean, how many people are fighters in plate armor and have a background that they were a guard or something, but like don't use that when they go to a new city and get stopped by the guard? And like, how many people be like, oh, I got this. Like, let me talk to this guy. Like, sometimes they do, but again, it's so interesting. Like, you have rogues who will say like, well, are they speaking thieves' cant? And it's like, but that's just it. It's like, but you're a rogue. Like, you have a background, you have a history with this, you have insights into this person. And again, both players and DMs, I don't think, utilize this, where, DMs, as for us as DMs, we could be better at giving cues to players. Like, hey, there's no thieves' cant going on, but you notice X, Y, and Z about him, without making a roll for it, right? Because you're a rogue, you have that background.
Right.
And I think this entire conversation, I think we've been more leaning towards players in the way that we've spoken, but this also applies to DMs and taking your players' classes into account, right?
Yes.
Because there's so many times where you're expecting the player to get the hint, but are you giving hints that make sense for each of these players, right?
Right.
Like, again, somebody, a rogue who has a background in, manipulating people probably would, even without a roll, might catch on that there is a roll that could be made, right? Like, hey, yeah, but when he said that, there was like a little flicker in the corner of his mouth. Like, can I roll for that? Can I roll for something? Like, well, you could roll insight. Like, you don't have to tell them, hey, roll insight. And you don't have to give it to them that the guy's lying. But if the rogue would notice something like that based on their backstory, it is kind of on us as DMs to be able to give them that opportunity, right? That player may not, again, that player chose all of that. But if they're not thinking about their class as part of their backstory, maybe they're not thinking, oh, well, as a rogue, and I'm all about deception and performance, like, I would know if someone's lying to me, I would have a better chance. So if they're not thinking about that, they may not ask for an insight check, but you may give them a reason to question, should I make a check, right? So again,
giving them something to question, I really like that, because I think too often it's more like, okay, I don't. Because I've been in the place where my players, they just don't know what to do. Like, I'm trying to give them stuff to do, but like, I'm trying to give them like avenues that they can pursue. But when you treat them like they're their character, and you get them to like think from the perspective of their character, I feel like it helps them to see those things where they might not see it otherwise. It's
like, don't wait for them to ask what their character would notice. Give them things their character would notice, and then let the player catch on.
Yes.
Like, because again, and this doesn't have to be direct. You don't have to look at the rogue and be like, you saw his mouth curl, like at the end there. You can just say, sometimes it could be a perception check. Sometimes it could just be open. But what I do is instead of giving the information to the individual, I give the information to the group, or I just say it as a side piece. Like I say it just like a side comment in order to get the people who could catch on to catch on, right? Because I don't want to basically give them the answer, but I do want them to recognize that, hey, your character would have seen this, so I said this for one of you. Like, I may say something that doesn't matter to anybody in the room, but I may have said it for somebody in the room because if they're paying attention, they would be like, oh, my character should catch on to that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And those are those kind of like aspects where, a bender, like an earthbender, may notice shifted gravel or just may notice dust that's not normal, or dirt here, and you're like, we're in the middle of a cave. Why is there like sand, dirt, soil here? Why would anyone else notice that, right? It's a dingy, dirty cave. But as a bender, you're like, wait, that really does stand out. So I might be like, hey, you're in a cave, and then over in one corner there is, there's like, it's dingy, it sounds damp. You can kind of see, some like cobwebs, whatever. It's a small little dirt pile over there, blah, blah, blah over here. You see, you think you hear some water over there. I'm not necessarily going to flat out tell the bender that looks strange to you. But if the bender's paying attention, be like, you said dirt? Just like, can I go
like
pay?
Soil dirt?
So of course the bender's like, can I mess with it? Like it's going to catch your attention. That's the kind of DMing I do when I know I can entice someone without being like, hey, make a perception check. You noticed dirt.
Right.
Like, you could do that. You could just everyone make a perception check. But why would everyone make the perception check? It would only be the bender. And then you could be like, hey, bender, make a perception check. And then you could be like, oh, well, you don't notice the pile of dirt. But sometimes I like it to be missed, like missable. But there are some times where I think we overuse this.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to just hand it to him. I don't want to tell the bender, hey, that pile of dirt's strange to you. But sometimes it's like, I don't want you to have the opportunity to miss this without your own chance.
Right.
So, like you've talked about player agency. If I tell you there's a pile of dirt and you just go, cool, moving on. Because, hey, guess what? You're the dude all about dirt. You're the guy who can mess with dirt. You haven't seen dirt for the last 4 days in this tunnel, in this dungeon, and you want to ignore the dirt pile? Hey, guess what? You can't be mad at me when I told you there was a dirt pile. But you've mentioned this how often of if I were to say, hey, bender, make a perception check. And they go, oh, I didn't make it. So the water sounds over that way.
Yeah.
No one heard about the dirt. And then you get to the end and they're like, well, how are we supposed to do this? But like, well, there was a pile of dirt, and they would have been like, where? Like, well, that perception check you missed?
Sucks.
Yeah. That's the point that sucks so bad, like you've talked about, where there are times where something can be missable, right? Especially if you have an open world like us, where everything is technically missable. But there are some times where it's like, narratively speaking, it's just like what we would call too much of a dick move to let them miss it, at least not on their own accord, right? So it's like, this is really important. I know it's really important. I'm not going to let you have a chance to miss this by a dice roll. That's not fair.
Right.
Because then you just literally have no chance. But I will slip it into my details, and if you don't pay attention, sucks to suck.
Right.
And so there's that fine line of playing with that. Hoi Lepa, it is great to see you. So I'm trying to think of like what are some other ones that we haven't talked about yet? Because I mean, there's a bunch of subclasses. I'm just trying to talk about like the top layer of classes. I mean, we talked about like how Bard can really inspire backstory and personality. Yeah. We've talked about Fighter quite a bit, Wizards, Rogues quite a little bit. Barbarian. Barbarian. How many people like I have heard occasionally people like discuss a reason for like their rage, one of my favorites was the small butler dwarf barbarian who like whenever anything like got messed up, like if someone messed up his suit, like whenever he went into rage, he'd be like before he wanted to rage in combat, he'd be like, oh well, that last person when he did that attack, he hit my friend and there was blood and now it's on my lapel, and I realized how long that's going to take to get out. And oh my God, my suit is stained. I'm not. And then he rages, right? Like he would always make it a reason, like a trigger. And I'm like, I've seen some people do like theatrical triggers, like they, instead of just saying I rage, like there's a reason. But how many people when they choose barbarian, like think about why do you rage? Not just the trigger, but like, what does that mean about you? Like, were you abused? Are you just a hair trigger? Do you just have no control over your emotions? Like, how cool would that be? You choose to be a barbarian, and the way that you explain it, the way that you incorporate the class, is that you say all of my emotions are erratic. I feel immense amounts of sorrow. I could cry at a moment's notice. I get offended easily. I rage easily. Like, what if that was just your character, right? But most people just do a barbarian, and what do they play? They play aggressive, intimidating, and rageful. But why? Why are you so rageful at these moments? And even if you have a trigger, where did it come from? Why is this part of your character? Why does your character have this need for this outlet? And how many people have, like, we always think about rage as in anger because it's, rage, but right? But rage is a condition. Rage is a feature. It is technically not the narrative descriptor, right? Like, you rage, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be like mad, right? Like, how about shifting rage to being a different uncontrollable emotion? Like, what if someone says they black out? What if someone's rage was blackout? Like hey,
like Mob Psycho, lightweight.
What if you're like I want to be a barbarian because I come from an ancestry of werewolves, but we lost the ability to transform. So when I rage, I black out. But that's how it manifests now. Like we've been diluted. So somewhere along my bloodline there was a werewolf, and now it's manifested as my rage. So I black out. And imagine, because why don't like no one ever thinks about that? Where we know that rage comes with conditions, right? Like we like most people play it like you're not thinking straight, but there are certain things that you can't do, like you can't cast spells, like because it's described as you're raging. But how many people play it as in, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, truly play
like
it.
You're mindless.
Yeah. Or how many people, like play it as in there's a purpose for the rage. Like I go like how many people play a rage like Hulk is, where it's controllable versus uncontrollable versus
where you're always angry.
Why does it always have to be a bad emotion? Why can't it be a good emotion? Right? Like, you could say I rage, but in excitement. What if you just played like a hyperactive character and you're just like, oh my God, it's fight time! And then you just like almost like you could, like, dude, why isn't Goku considered a barbarian? Super Saiyan is just it's just basically raging. Like,
I mean,
like it's like mindset wise, why couldn't you just play a monk barbarian and you're just love fighting so much that when someone hits you, like, and that's just your thing where it's like, it's not until I take damage where I'm just like, I get excited and go, oh, let's go. And then like you're raging, but it's because of excitement, not anger. Like, these are those things where it's like, if we look at the class and what the class did for you, how you got here, and what the class means for your character and to your character, that adds so much of that depth and enrichment that I again, not necessarily that we're missing as in it's necessary. It's just that people who want more out of their player, out of their character, or who want to build more of an enriching backstory, it's just that class is overlooked. Class is much overlooked as a part of your character, and much more it's just looked at as what I can get out of it, right? Like what I can do with it.
That's kind of fair. Halepis says the Hulk rage is like a split personality, almost like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde vibe.
Right? Like, why not? Why couldn't you do that? So I once played a barbarian who is essentially a monk, other than monk doesn't get the power of reason but emotions. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, having that split personality would be cool. I mean, also, like, why not have that quirk? When you rage, just act differently, and you don't have to act barbarish and ape-like. But imagine having a barbarian that has slightly low intelligence, but when you rage, he just talks like very fluidly. So like when he's like, he goes into rage in the middle of combat, he's like, "Watch out, you are about to be struck in your back." "My friend, I shall be with you in a moment." And then when they're out of rage, they're like, "Yeah, go fight." But when they're in rage, they're just very clear. So they're not, and you don't have to say like they're more intelligent. It's just that the rage is just making them focus on the time at hand. So they, they're not as distracted, and they can like say things pointed to people. Like little quirks like that
focus. Oh, I could definitely see that. Like,
yeah, it's just one of those things where picking a class can mean so much more than what you can do with the character. But I think it should be a lot more about what comes with the character, right? The history. How did you get here? How do you train? When you level up, how does that look? I think could also lend a lot of interest or a lot of influence, I should say, not interest, but influence into how your character is, right? Because how you level up, how you manifest that in terms of, whether you go to a school or you go to a training class or you do it by yourself or you do it with, somebody else like the party members, all of that is an indicator of personality, right? It's an indicator of how your character operates in the world, right? Do you go out and search the best of the best in the local area to learn from to level up, or do you just trust that you can do it yourself, right? And again, if you're one to just be like, no, I just level up by myself, I go into the woods, I spend a week, and then I'm leveled up, then I expect later in the campaign, when there's choices to be made, I don't expect that character to be the first one to be like, we should go ask for help.
Right.
Like, that's what I'm talking about. If you chose a class, this isn't really class specific, but if you chose an aspect that puts you in one direction, use that to your personality to be like, this is how my character would act. Because if you're always by yourself, but anytime the plot gets difficult, your character's always the first to be like, we should go find help. Be like, anything about your character doesn't do anything with help until you run into a challenge. And then you just don't want to do it. Like, that's the player coming through, not the character.
Right.
And that's that aspect of, and
that goes back into me not wanting my character to do certain things. It's like there's a way to tell the difference, and I think it's something that's missed. Like, even as the DM, there will be times where it's like, I could stop my players from doing something. Like, I can see them setting up something, and I could stop it, but there's no reason for these NPCs to, like, see into that, or to, like, you want it to make sense, so you don't just feel like you're sitting here trolling them every time they do any, like, make sure, like, they're going through it with that kind of mindset, and that should be both sides of the equation, because both of you guys, the DM and the players, are there to tell
you should both
story.
be. I mean, a great pop culture reference for all of this is like the Avengers movies, like specifically the Avengers movies.
Very
and the reason
so.
why I say that is because we could probably all look at the Avengers and apply a general class to each character, right? But the way that they told those stories, each throughout their own individual movies, plus just looking at the original Avengers, right? Just the original Avengers movies. As fun as they are, and as much as you could stereotype each type of class or each type of character, Marvel did an amazing job at representing them holistically, in the sense that the way that Iron Man and Tony Stark approach a problem is the same. They are both methodical, logical, but they both apply brute force. Like, that is just his personality. His personality is, I am going to accomplish this or die trying. And I am going to use all of, my logic and understanding, and I am going to overcome this. But it's also via brute force. You know what I mean? When he's in the lab, he's literally like, it represents him as someone who spends all night going through every possible equation until it works, right? He's the one that goes through every possible armor and alloy combination until he gets the right suit. He doesn't just think and think and think and wait. He brute forces it. He literally has Jarvis working on 3 different prototypes at a time because he needs to get it done. When he goes into battle, he brute force, like, he's not sitting there like picking people off. You know what? He's going.
He's got a million suits, all of them shooting all at the same time.
Exactly. You have.
I mean, he's smart. He's strategic. He's intelligent, but he tries to, like. I say the difference between them is, like, when you look at Tony Stark versus Batman. Batman is way more like, I'm willing to wait. I can be patient. I can bring you into a trap. Here's the deal: is like, I'm going to shove you into my trap, but there's going to be a trap. There's going to be thought into it.
There's going to be 5 other traps in case you miss that trap, but I'm going to shove you into it. Yeah, and, and then you take someone like Black Widow. Look at how they presented her entire history. Not just the way she fights, but the way she deals with the party, like the other Avengers. The way that she uses her manipulation but tries not to, but only like you know what I mean? Like, she can do all of those things, but she has her respectful boundaries, but uses it when she needs to. The way that she deals with them is the way that she approaches, fighting and survival. Like, she has a process to that. Going to Hulk's a little bit different, but that's just a little bit harder because we don't really ever get to see Hulk until he becomes like Dr. Hulk. Like until
you don't see
until
the
they
whole-
merge, we don't really see him. But you would assume that again, when you do see Hulk, it's instinctual, it's emotional, it's very impulsive. It's act now. And whereas his alternative is very reserved, right? It's not about acting now. And that's a great contrast, right? He doesn't want to act out until he rages out. And then that's his outleash. That's his his outlet is to be able to be impulsive in that mode. But when he's not, he's meek. He's not impulsive. He's very, I don't know kind of person. But you go into Hulk mode and Hulk's just like, just go, just start moving, right? Thor, you have this near God level, but you also have the ego to go with it, right? Like he doesn't understand our culture. He comes from this era, he comes from a place of gods, but when it also comes down to it, like he also has respect. He understands the hierarchy of things. When they're all fighting together, he doesn't look at any of them as lesser than him because they all hold their own. He respects all of them, but when the fight's over, like he still respects them all, but he's still a god. But that comes across in all aspects of him, right? When he fights with that honor, that respect, and that prowess, but also that ego. And it's that ego of not like the Homelander ego of I'm absolutely better, so everyone's beneath me, but it's that I'm a god jokingly, but no, you don't understand. I'm a god. I have a purpose. I have a role, and it's a pride, right? You see it when they're not fighting. It's jokingly an ego, but in the fighting, you see it's that same ego, but it's more pride based. It's more of a this is my job and I will finish it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean by like when you look at applying their histories and how each of them have grown and the way that they tackle problems, you can see it all as the same, right? They don't change. Like Tony Stark doesn't approach things differently and erratically, and he doesn't not think through things once he turns the suit on. He's still the same methodical, clever person. He's still coming up with strategy. He's still brute forcing it, but also being, logical about it. It's not like they alter their personalities the moment they go into combat. But you do see that in D&D. You do see people just shift because D&D combat's all about just leave alive, and they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that before, about how we could change that mindset up. But yeah, I think Marvel's a great opportunity to kind of look at like how they represent all of the characters, both on and off the battlefield, how they interact with each other, and how those personalities make sense for how they all got there, right? Like how Tony Stark became Iron Man makes sense. How the Hulk and Bruce Banner eventually became... is it Dr. Hulk? I forget what they call him when he became.
Oh, I don't know.
Because he had a different name. He's still Hulk, but I know he had a special name when they were together, or when they merged. But you know what I mean? Like they all made sense, but none of them progressed the same. They all, no one else like did what Hulk did and learned to live with themselves, right? They all had to overcome their own things, but they all did it in the way in which made sense to their characters.
Very much so.
But it was also represented in what I would call their class. Like, not just their personalities and the way they acted, but just everything they did, the way that they approached every situation was very synergistic, was very consistent with the characters. And granted, we're talking about, a comic book that's been around for 50 years, so it was easy to stick to that. But it's just a great way to show that when you have a party that works together and each individual person is playing that part and being influenced by all of the decisions that they've made, right? Everything that they've put together, you find that there is much more enrichment, right? You find that there's a lot more engagement with everybody, because it's not meant to be like you have to keep all of these things in mind. But when you realize that, oh, I'm choosing this class and it comes with these features, but that also means it comes with some, expectations or some stereotypes, you can use those stereotypes either to lean into them or lean away from them, but use that to build a more defined character instead of just being like, oh no, I'm a fighter, but my personality is whatever I want it to be, right? It's like, there's nothing wrong with being a surfer who's a fighter, right? Like a surfer dude attitude as a fighter, but does everything that you do match what you've chosen, or are you just choosing them to be able to do certain actions?
Yeah, it really is nice when things make sense and when things go together well.
Professor Hulk. Thank you so much, Hoilepa. It's Professor Hulk. I knew that he had a title or a name when he merged. It was Professor Hulk. Thor, yes. You could. So interesting. You say that Thor could be considered a barbarian.
Thor?
Yeah. I mean, I guess he does sort of have a charge up. Like he can do the whole like cover himself with the electricity. Like later he was able to get the suit that like charges him up, and then you get the glowing eyes and everything. And I guess he is very like explosive in terms of his like he goes and sometimes he doesn't think fair. Like when he killed Thanos, that whole issue was he wasn't thinking clearly. So you could actually argue that he went rage mode when he cut Thanos' head off.
Yes, but would you say that is the majority of, because when I look at a barbarian, I feel like that's like a majority of their kit. Like the Hulk initially, that was the majority of his kit. He's just a regular dude until he rages. He's just this person until he goes into this mode. And that's kind of how I feel like, okay, you are who you are, but then you go into a completely different mode and you're almost not necessarily a completely different person, but like you said, you see red, you black out, you whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily feel like that's what Thor does regularly. Or even if it's just go into another mode to like a focus mode. Like, so
that he does say that in his second movie, he has something called Berserker Rage. Like an actual thing that Thor does. So I've never heard. I haven't seen his second movie. I only saw his first movie. I didn't see his second one.
I remember. I don't know which one the second one is. I remember the one where we're buddies from work, where he's like in the weird arena, and I don't know if that's the one where he gets fat or the one where
yeah, but is that the yeah? I only saw his first one because Thor's never just been. I've just never been a huge Thor fan. I do like him in the movies. Like they did a really good job at representing him.
They did a fairly good
but
job.
Just never
with
been
the
my
majority
comic.
Of them. You know, there's a couple that I'm like about, but you know, for the most part, I like their.
I mean, I could see it again. You know, even without like the Berserker Rage, I could see, I could Thor as displayed in the movies does have a hard time controlling his emotions, and he does act erratically in those moments.
He acts more like a kid to me, like just like a kid that never really grew up, or somebody who didn't have a lot of discipline growing up.
So, like I could say, I could justify, I could see how Barbarian would make sense for him. But yeah, it just depends on how literal or how figurative you want to get with like the abilities.
Who I say could be considered a barbarian, not on the Marvel side, but on the DC side, is Shazam. Weird, because you enter in a different state. It's not necessarily
Warlock.
a rage state.
It's Warlock.
Yeah.
It has to be Warlock because no rage state. It's yes because his whole personality changes, but rage to me should indicate something more limiting because like using D&D specifically, it's like you can't cast spells. So it to me rage indicates you are in a locked in mindset, and whether it be rage and anger and all of that, but the rage aspect of a barbarian would mean that you're kind of tuning out everything else and you're kind of just honing in on something. Shazam's more of like a whole metamorphosis, right? Like you are just something else, which is more akin to a warlock because it's like a granted power. But it's almost like not really a druid, but almost like wild shaping almost. Cause you're fully becoming something different, and then you get knocked out of it and go back to normal. So yeah, I don't know if I would do the Shazam full change as like an actual barbarian move.
I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves when it comes to
we do want to do that though. That is a topic that we do want to get into one of these days. It's actually breaking down like some pop culture stuff and seeing what we can come up with in terms of like what classes and how they would fit in D&D. That would be really fun. Let's see. I'm trying to think of like I think we've covered most of the classes because Warlock would be a big fun one because again, what led you to call upon a greater deity? How did you call upon that great? Like, do you know how many people have never like thought after choosing the Warlock class, like, how did that go? By the way, just how were you just walking down the street one day and some guy in a trench coat was like, "Hey, you want some power, kid?" Or, did you murder a goat to do this? Like, did you have to sacrifice a pinky toe? Like, how did you get their attention? Why did you get their attention? What was the deal? Like, how many people have chosen a warlock and never have actually decided what the deal was? Like to be completely honest, how many of you out there have made a warlock class and never once was like, what? How did I get? Like, there had to have been exchange, right? The whole point of a warlock is you make a deal. And I mean, I'm sure people would just default to, well, my soul, obviously. It's like, but why? Like, why would his greater demon
to give up?
Well, yeah. Well, what were you willing to give it up, and why was the demon willing to give you power just for your soul? You know what I mean? Like, there has to be an equivalent exchange of something. Like if they could just take anybody's soul, believe me, there are plenty of greedy people. If they just needed souls, literally, there are so many greedy people. They could literally be knocking on doors, and they couldn't sell enough of their power.
That is what I'll say. That's where I come in. Like, I will let my players make up as much as you like, and there's just stuff that they're not going to know.
Yeah.
So if they have no idea why their soul is that important, then they just have no idea. Like, if you want to make up a reason, if you want to do that at character creation, by all means, we can work that into the... But if you don't make it up and be like, I can make a reason.
Right. And that's just my thing is, like, there's... People make those choices, and it's just like, you want the stuff that comes with it, but, again, not that you have to, but you don't want to put any thought into, like, where it came from.
Now, let me ask you this. Specifically when it comes to warlocks, how often is that likely actually true for people who become warlocks? How likely is it that they are just so infatuated with what they think they can get that they're willing to give up whatever, not necessarily understanding the full
I would say
grips of
that's
their
I would say that that's
consequences?
more rare. I mean, I would assume, like, lore wise, I would assume that warlock is either a desperation or out of desperation or out of greed. Something or passion, like what you were saying.
Sure.
Like, I absolutely believe that there are some people who are just like, I don't care what it takes. I want power. I believe that there could be people who thought they could outsmart it. Like, okay, make me more powerful. Then I'll just become a lich and you can't kill me. Something like that, right? Or there are the people who were just like so desperate. They're like, I don't care anything out there that can hear me. I will give you my soul to help me.
I also see and this might be along the power hungry side of things, but those like, imagine like a prince or something, and they just have such an ego-minded center idea of themselves that they think that nothing's gonna faze them, like nothing's going to, and so they'll go and they'll do this thing, they'll make this deal thinking that it's not gonna be that big of a deal. Oh, I'll say I'll give them my soul, but it won't be that big of a deal, or I'll sign on the dotted line without actually reading the contract I'm signing with this entity or whatever, and they just feel like stuff's gonna work out for them because it always has and it always does, because they've had a silver spoon in their mouth all the time or whatever the case may be, and so they just walk into it and they're like,
well, and Hoylipa makes a good point too, is because this is, again, where DMs come in. Like, again, we tend to be talking towards, like, players in this respect, but this is where DMs can come in because, like you were talking about, the player doesn't always have to know what's going on in the background, right? Because, I mean, sometimes I know that the big deal about warlocks is that a lot of times you don't even know who your patron really is. You know what they are or what they really are, right? Like, they may have a name like the Forgotten One or whatever, but other times it's just an otherworldly being that can give you power, right? So Hoylipa makes a good point of, like, some, it doesn't always have to be a soul. Like, that's kind of, more of a classical mindset.
Right.
But imagine, a demon, or imagine a creature who has a vendetta against somebody, so they go and corrupt their child. And they make their child make the pact so they can get back at, their parents or something, right? Like,
yeah.
Or... you have someone who wants to, usurp a throne, so they grant someone power, and they're just like, oh, in return, just 2 things. Go to this location. When you're powerful enough, go to this location, and you owe me a favor when you get there. That's it. You can have all the power, and then when you get there, and the whole thing is like, they go and they take over this kingdom. Like, I've taken over this kingdom, my lord, for you, and then they come by and go, cool, I'm king now. Get the fuck out. We're done. That was your deal. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the whole thing of, like, I just needed you to, do something for me.
Right.
Like, there's so many unique ways to go about that. And Also, side thought, I found this, I've always found this interesting. I love how paladins can lose their power, but there really, as far as I know, isn't a way for a warlock to lose their power. Like, I don't think there's anything in the book that because paladins can, like, lose their faith or, like, drop from their path and be stripped of their stuff. I know Rules is Written has rules for that, but I don't think warlocks. Yeah, you can actually lose.
Well, I didn't know
paladinhood.
there was like a actual section in the rules that outlined what that looks like.
There used to be. I don't know about current paladins because I don't know how things changed with oaths. When paladins were divine based, if you went against your deity, you would actually be stripped of paladinhood. You would actually lose all your paladin abilities.
They talk about it in like the description text and stuff like that when it comes to paladins, but they also, I would say, is the similar is true for warlocks. It's like if you go against your patron, like there was.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think the book really lays out because I remember that there are penalties. Like the book will actually lay out what happens to the paladin and how they can actually get their powers back, but they lose stuff. I don't think the book's ever mentioned that warlocks can.
I don't. What I'm saying is, I don't think 5th edition. I don't know about 2nd edition.
And I don't think it's ever
talks
mentioned
about for either of them.
Interesting.
Because I think that both of them are only mentioned to the extent that it just says, hey, if you piss off the person giving you your powers, it is very likely that they will retaliate against you. And they basically say stuff like,
so they've removed all of this.
Specific.
Okay.
There's no like specific rule set.
Because there used to be a whole thing where you would actually like you would lose your title, you'd lose all your powers, and then there was this whole ordeal. Like in the book, there was this whole ordeal that the player would have to go through, like basically a side campaign to get it all back if they wanted.
And I will say, this is Matt Mercer, by the way, but he in one of his campaigns, one of his players did inevitably revoke their warlock patron, and they did lose all of their powers. They just lost, like, they technically had those player levels, but there was no classes attached to them.
And Horlipa made an understanding is just, you wouldn't get the spells and everything. I think I would go further than that, just more lore wise, because it's like, it just doesn't seem like, another worldly patron wasted all that time on you. It doesn't seem like that all they would do is just
take your power away.
Yeah, it's like there's got to be some sort of punishment. Like again, like with the paladin, there's like a whole thing that you have to do to basically redeem yourself. So that should be another maybe like an interesting one. I'll look into that history of the paladin and see if I can find if it's worth another episode, like its own episode.
Okay.
Horlipa also mentioned like doing sorcerer. So it's like, I think we mentioned this before, I think Horlipa before you were here, but sorcerer is a good class to help learn more about your character because you don't have to necessarily play like the overly cocky, I think was my example. But with a sorcerer, coming from the mindset that they just kind of can do magic and they don't really have to like try hard, kind of similar to what I was saying about someone who always does things by themselves is like the last person to say, hey, let's go get help. With like a sorcerer, you kind of expect them to be the people who, like, I would expect part of the personality to get from a sorcerer is someone who kind of just always has a gut instinct, or who always has not necessarily optimism, but who's always that kind of person who is like, nah, it'll work out. Like, we don't need a plan. It'll work out. Like, and the reason why I say that is, again, not like this is all sorcerers, but if you think about like a sorcerer and where they came from, everyone always told them, hey, you got to study, you got to study, you got to study, you got to do all this. And they're like, nah, I'm going to go have a few beers and over the weekend and I'll catch you guys on Monday and I'll pass the test. You know what I mean? Like, they're that guy. They're the guy who didn't study. They're the guy who like got to party all the time and just ace tests. They're the ones who they just naturally know they're the natural athlete. They don't have to go to the gym. They don't have to practice, but they show up on the court and they're just, doing moves around everybody. That's a sorcerer, right? So I imagine that when you play that sorcerer, I would less expect a sorcerer to be the first person to say, hey, let's go research this. I wouldn't expect a sorcerer to be the first one to be like, hey, let's hit the library. Mm-hmm. Like a sorcerer is someone who I would expect has more of that gut instinct, knee-jerk reaction, like, hey, let's go talk to this guy instead of research what it is, right? The one who would be like, hey, he looks like this. I think he might, he looks like he could be, weak to poison, instead of going and trying to figure out, about him and find that weakness, right? Seems like they would be the one to just kind of take a shot in the dark and see if it works.
Right.
Not necessarily a risk taker, but someone who I think would just believe in their intuition more. And again, I imagine that coming from this, history of basically being told it takes time and effort to do something, and they're just kind of cocky, like, look what I can do. Like, how long did that take you to do it? Like, so that would bleed into their personality, I would believe.
Right.
And maybe they'll be humble about it. Maybe, again, these are just one direction. You could take that same thing, flip the coin, and go the whole humble route. Be like, I have no idea. I just literally just be the whole, I have no idea how I can do this, right? Like, it's amazing that I have this ability. I'm so humbled to have it. And then anytime you do learn information, you can just be that character who's like, thank you for sharing that. That's, like, you could desire information out of the fact that there is something I can do that I can't explain. So that could literally lead you to just be the person who says, I want all of the information because I don't understand. I mean, imagine having a character personality to where your whole goal in life is to study magic because you can't understand magic, but you're a sorcerer. Like, your whole purpose is to talk to mages. Like, your personality is very open to talking about magic, and you want to hear about magic because conceptually it's like, I can do mathematics, but you can't teach me mathematics. You know what I mean? Like, I could do the equations, but you can't teach me fundamentals. Imagine that lifestyle where you're just like, I just want to understand, why can I make fire erupt 30 feet over there? Why can I do that? Then you go to school and you talk to mages and they're like, well, here's the intricacies of the world and here's how it works. And if you do these words, and I'm like, but I don't say words. Look, fire, look, fire. Look, you had to say all these things and look at me. I can explain this. Like, imagine that whole life where you're just going to people and be like, please explain it. Tell me why I can do this. Imagine that humble but like almost psychotic nature of that character build, where they can use magic, but they're going driven insane, not understanding how. Like, imagine playing that on level ups. You get a new spell and they're freaking out like, guys, I can now do, why can I do this?
Why does it give me mutant vibes from the old school X-Men, where they're like coming across their powers for the first time, or Rogue kisses somebody.
Oh yeah, and just like, it's almost a curse.
What's his name? Like, shoots his lasers.
Oh,
So, all that kind of stuff. Dude, that whole mentality of just like coming across.
Imagine playing a sorcerer who thinks they're cursed. Like they think of magic as like you said, like Rogue, where it's like they thought it was cool at first, and then they did something, and they're like, I hurt someone, and now they're like afraid of their own. Like,
yep.
These are what I'm talking about. Where it's like, if you look at what the class represents, you can take that and kind of apply that to a life and be like, well, what would that have brought out in that lifestyle? And then you can think about, I think first of the stereotypes. But then you think about, how do I flip that stereotype, right?
Right.
And this is how you can make that more enriching character, by really understanding the class that you chose and not just the features that it gives you.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
He's called Cyclops.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that. It just didn't come to my brain fast enough. Whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, let's see. I think we've covered most of the standard classes. I mean, other than subclasses, I think we've covered all the top level stuff. Let me do one little quick look here.
Quick little look-see.
I mean, I wasn't really planning on specifically going through each one, but I mean, since we were. So let's see. So we've talked about, so Artificer would be an interesting one. Again, understanding that, like, whether or not you represent Artificers as being able to see magic or just understand it but not be able to manipulate it, you know what I mean? Because they tinker with like items and potions and magical equipment. So it's like you could look at it as, again, you can't do magic, but you tried. Like, maybe you were sent, like, maybe, like, imagine this. So an artificer can see magic or manipulate it, but they can't actually use it, right? So what does that mean? What kind of life does that look like? Well, how would you have discovered that? So imagine being part of a family of mages. And every generation you get sent off to school, and you were sent off to school with your siblings, and you kept flunking class, but you aced potions and you aced wands. Anytime there was a magical item involved, you aced the class. And in fact, you would end up being like best friends with that teacher and like the professor, and like doing things and being the person who like Like, you failed all your tests, but you were always there after
It's always
class.
the practical application you had issues with, but when it came to
Theoretical applications, you were the person, like, after hours with the professor tinkering, right? Like, you could use that whole thing of, like, you tried to study magic and it just comes to you differently. Or you just can't touch it. You can't do anything with magic, but you understand it better than anybody else. You know what I mean? It could be that direction. Maybe it could be, oh man, imagine playing an artificer who's oblivious to magic. You just think that's how things work. You just think everyone's stupid for being like, you don't see if I just do this, this works like this. You know, stupid.
have you ever seen the anime called Fire Force? So it's a pretty interesting anime. Some of the characters can get a little annoying sometimes, but there's this one character who had this power, and it was so weird. But it's kind of how I envision some artificers might actually view magic, where it's like they can actually see the tendrils of magic that like connect stuff together, and they can actually see, oh, magic's for sure like flowing from this to this, or like this has this own little aura over here, like I know what's, and so like they just literally they see the world differently. They understand, they're like, to them it's super normal, it's super regular, everyday. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Like, of course there's magic in that. I don't know, that's kind of the energy that makes sense to me from.
Yeah.
But
I'm
very
looking
interesting.
I'm looking at the thing here. I think, yeah. Artificer, Barbarian, we've talked about Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger,
Rogues for
Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. Yeah. We've basically, like, realistically, I think, yeah. I think the whole point of what we wanted to talk about today was just that don't overlook your class selection. Your class can be so much more about your character's character, right? Like, it can be so much more than what you can do, and it can be so much more about who you are. And yeah, I think that was kind of like the big point I wanted to make today, is that I feel like class selection is far too focused on what you can do with it and not what it means for the character, like what it actually meant for the build. We see stereotypes, but I think more people could really dig into, like, what did choosing this class do for my character throughout their life, right? Was I drawn to this class because of my physical attributes, or, my personal attributes, or do I have personal attributes because I was of this class, right? Like, again, were you a fighter because you were naturally strong, or did you become strong because you became a fighter, right? That neither answer is correct. It's just that when you think of fighters, you think of people that are strong or fast, right? You think of muscular people. So when you think of being a fighter, did you gain the muscle, or did you always have the muscle? Because that right there, that simple question of which came first, can lead you down a direction of personality for your character. If you say that you were just naturally strong, so you became a fighter, that kind of means that you're the person who's going to lean into their natural traits. You're going to lean into what fits you best. But if you're someone who wasn't, super strong, and you say that you became a fighter to become strong, that means that I expect your personality to be someone who's going to fight for what they want. You're going to try hard. You're going to go that extra mile. You're going to be more likely to accept the harder path and the challenge for the outcome you want instead of the easy route. You know what I mean?
Right.
Those are those things, what I mean by, like, choosing the class and understanding how your character got there can make a lot of those decisions and help you really fully grasp what your character is all about. Doesn't have to, but I think it's a super beneficial opportunity.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. I think too few people, like we've been saying this whole time, like, actually think about these things when they're playing. A lot of them their mindset is like, what's most powerful, not
it's
like,
what's on paper.
Who am I? Mm-hmm. Like, to be honest, weird segue, but I really think that's kind of true in reality too. Like, too many humans are just out here worried about what they can physically do, not so much of like who they are and stuff like that. So.
You see that in the workforce though. I mean, before it was so, like, in previous generations, it was so much more about your career, like, what do you do, and what you did. Like,
that's why everyone was focused on going to college, getting a job.
Like, what you did mattered, and what you did didn't change, right? Like, for 30 years, you were an accountant, you were a tax consultant, you were a banker, you were, a mortgage, you were a real estate agent. Like what you did defined you in a lot of ways, and there was expectations. But nowadays, people are more looking about like, well, what can I do? Like if I go to this job, what skills do I get to walk away with, right? Like if I choose this class, what can I do with it? It's not so much about I'm choosing this class. What does it mean for me? What does it say about me? Am I going here because I have the skill sets, or do I want the skill sets so I went here, right?
Right.
That's not how it is. It's now realistically, it is a mindset of, well, how long do I have to be at this company before I can walk away with something to show for it? And what's the benefit of showing that, right? It's not about I'm going to be this forever. It's about what can I have early, like, or sooner than later.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
it's very interesting because yes, it is. I don't think that they're correlated. I think those are two just absolute coincidences because I think that they are both, they pop up in their own islands, but it is a unique mindset shift when you look at, like what you said, applying that to the real world. So many people nowadays aren't worried about thinking about, what it means to be something for a long periods of time. They're just looking at what they're going to get from it.
Yep.
But yeah, that was a lot of fun. I am super happy with that topic.
Very much so.
I've been wanting to talk about that for a long time, about really utilizing class and understanding what the class means for your character selection. How it's more about your character's character. Because again, and I mean that, your character's character, because we think about like, what does character mean? A person's character. It's not their personality. Character is more about the consistent expectations, right? When you say someone has when you say like, when you describe someone's character, you don't say like they tell a lot of jokes. That's not in someone's character, right? Someone's character is like being, prideful, or, they'll stand up for, what's right, or, they have boundaries that they respect, right? That's part of someone's character. It's not the things that they do. It's the things that you can reliably point out about them that are those consistent foundations, right?
Right.
And that's what I mean, right? Like when you chose to be a fighter, there are connotations that are expected, right? The types of training that you did are gonna rub off on you. So how you train is gonna be how you think. How you think is gonna be how you act, right? So again, a rapier fighter is gonna be more about putting as much pressure on their enemy until their enemy weakens and they leave an opening. Whereas we talked about, the paladin that's, has a great hammer, has a war hammer and is in full plate mail. He doesn't have time. He doesn't have the energy to make all of those swings and wait for the enemy to open up. He's going to methodically wait for the moment he knows is the right moment, and then he's going to put everything he has into it, right?
Yes.
Which makes more sense. Why would you would expect someone who's a rapier fighter to be more, not necessarily erratic, but more impulsive, whereas you expect that brute to be the quiet, the strong, quiet type who's waiting for you to just be that moment to where then he's going to act, and that act is going to be enough. And
Right.
that's that mindset of you expect that that's exactly how he's going to train. He trains until he's ready. He waits until he's ready to act. So you would expect that his mindset is, my actions need to have big outcomes. So wait until the moment. So again, just a lot of different ways that you could really help flesh out your character just by paying attention to the things you choose. And I just want to end this with, this does not end here with the conversation of class. Like we have already talked about this, right? Class leads into weapons. Like again, paladin,
Yes.
a rapier fighter versus a great axe fighter. Armor choices can also lead into character design and personality design, right? People who are like more going to dress like tanks are more likely to stand their ground. People who are glass cannons are more likely to put distance or run away. These are personality traits. They're not just survival instincts. They're how you interact and navigate the world, right? Wizards, if you want to add personality to your wizard, make sure that when you go to bars and taverns and public places, make sure the wizard's always near an exit, because he's more likely to want to run. You know what I mean? Where a paladin might be just front and center. He wants to stand in the middle of the room. He doesn't care if he gets surrounded, right? Like, so there's these mindsets of, have a character, if you're the rogue, just add it in ever so slightly that whenever something's about to happen, just make sure you always just say, like, I put my back up to the paladin. Or, I get up, I put my back up to the wizard. Like, just say that. Just add that personality quirk that you
Right.
never want your back exposed, because you know what you do? You backstab people. So your mindset, because you backstab people, is never put your back to somebody, right? Like if you're a pickpocket, you probably don't keep your wallet where it could be pickpocketed. You know all the
everybody else
best
can keep it.
spots, right? And so that's the idea, is if you have this character who's always cautious, constantly question people when you're talking. Or again, if something weird happens, a sound happens, just constantly say you're in a defensive position, because that makes consistency, and that fleshes out the character in everything that they do, right? If you act a certain way in combat, why don't you act that way out of combat? And again, if you want it to be different, just enrich it by making sure it's obvious that you act differently in combat. Like add that as part of your character of combat. I go into this.
This is my mode.
Yeah, but when I'm out of combat, I try to stay out of it, right? And if that's how you want to play it, add that to the backstory. Well, I'm a soldier, I'm a fighter, I have PTSD. So when we're in fight mode, I go into soldier mode. But when we're out, I try to shake that mode off, because I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that hard asshole anymore from the military. I want to be the fun-loving guy, right? That's a backstory. That's a personality trait that's using your class directly to help you build it. That's what we're talking about, right? So that's what I'm going to end you with. It doesn't have to end with class. Weapons, armor, spells. Like when you're building a warlock or a wizard, when you're choosing even not just your entire spell list, right? Because that can be pretty varied, but even like when you know this is going to be the spell I use most often, use that to express your personality, right? If you're the person who says, well, I'm taking Eldritch Blast and I'm just Eldritch Blast, like that's my go-to, that's kind of a personality quirk. Like it doesn't necessarily have to mean that Eldritch Blast is your personality, but ask yourself, where did your character get to this point? Why? Like you do it because it's a great damage output, right? But you can ask yourself, why does your character do it? Where did he get to this point where this was his go-to? Why is this his go-to?
I love when little questions like that turn into an entire like story in your backstory, and it becomes like, hey, there's this like campfire story moment where you get to like tell the other characters in your party a little bit more about you.
Right.
Like, hey, I had this experience, and that's why I'm the gunslinging Eldritch Blasty Blaster.
And the DM can then use these to enrich the narrative, right?
Very much so.
And break, like you say, like, oh, this thing happened, and this was like the only spell that I was able to survive on, and I actually had to hunt. So this was the only thing I learned how to do. So I had to like survive. So it's like you have that story, and then or like, oh, my family was kidnapped or whatever. So the DM could be like, oh, is that what happened? That's why you use Eldritch Blast. Like, okay. So you're those people that kidnapped your family, huh?
Yeah.
You're gonna run into them later. Like, that's just it. It's
Yeah.
like I would like to see people realize that class gives you so much more than just stuff to do. It gives you much more than feats. And again, there's so many aspects about your character. I mean, it could be anything from the weapons, armor, the spells that you choose. It could be, I guess anything beyond that is really talking about personality. But again, don't let these things not influence your personality, and don't let your personality not influence these things, right? If you are a fighter and you can have this list of all of these weapons, and you're like, well, really, I don't care what weapon I use. You just want to use the smart, you want to use like a powerful one, but you don't really care which one it is. Just look at the other details of your character and figure out which one makes the most sense, right? If you want to be fast and nimble, don't make a two-handed sword, right? Like if you want to do heavy hitting, like if you're not just going to choose a weapon based off of its damage output, you can figure out what else your character is doing to make it make sense.
Right.
So that is our topic for today. What are classes? What is a class? What does it mean? And how it can enrich your character build and your backstory. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. Been wanting to do that topic for a while, so I'm really happy. Let's see, we had a couple people show up. We had Hoylepa show up, which was awesome, and Pokeniner, so it was great to see both of you.
Fire.
Hoylepa, thanks for giving us some stuff to chat about. It's always great when you guys can give us some content. Big Dungeon Energy was lurking for a bit. Hopefully the kids got down all right.
Facts.
And hopefully everything's going good with that campaigning party. I know that they ran into a dragon recently.
Barely, go back and watch that
barely
episode.
got
I
out.
See that happen. I want to
barely
see that
got out, dude. The I don't know if you saw the snapshot of just like
I saw some of the people's
the
faces.
man
Oh
when
my
you can
gosh.
when you can make that many people like go peek a face, it's amazing.
It's fabulous.
But yeah, it's been great. I'm so happy that you guys were here. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys liked the episode. If you did, you guys know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. Let us know what you guys thought. Let us know your own ideas on how you have used classes to help integrate into your backstory or your personality, or what you might do in the future. Give us any other ideas that you guys might have that we just didn't come up with. If you guys want to share those with us, you guys can join the Discord. I will drop that link in the chat right now. You can, talk to the community. You could submit ideas for us to talk about on stream, or you could submit homebrew items, classes, anything that you guys have created, and you can submit those for us to review on Mondays. That's what we do here on Mondays. And if you've missed anything in this episode, or you just want to see any of our other live episodes, we have all of those on our VOD channel on YouTube, so that link is in chat as well. Otherwise, that is going to be it for us for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you had a fantastic week, and I hope you have a great weekend ahead of you. We are going to end it there, so happy Friday, y'all. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.